Hello, this is Jonathan McPhillips with Epiphany Fine Art, and I'm coming to you today from Wickford Harbor in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, and doing a plein air painting here on the harbor front of a couple shellfish skiffs. And as you can see, I've gotten started here with quick block in and a sketch of my darker areas first. So if you squint down at the image on the screen, you'll see kind of what I see here as a dark shape formed by the shadow of the boat and the hull of the boat, and then also along the line running up to the from the lower right up to the middle of the painting, or the canvas, which is the seawall right there that I sort of sketched in. So that dark line that kind of shoots across the that space right there just above the part that I'm filling in. Again, the shadow cast by the boat. So very loose at this stage, really, really brushy. Making sure that I get my brush strokes to go in different directions. Using a flat brush. I believe it's a number 4. I'll usually switch back and forth between a number 4 and a number 2 on this size canvas, which I believe is a 6 by 12. At the end of the video, stick around because I'll show an image of the palette that I use and the colors, and also a finished photo of the painting. So you can see I moved into some of my greens to depict that. There's a bit of grass and some reeds, some different plantings, I think, along the seawall there. Behind me, in this spot, is a town parking lot, very accessible. Great place to set up in all directions. You can see all kinds of different boats and buildings, and every season there's something different to see here. You can see on the palette image I'm putting out some Galkid and mineral spirits mix. That's what's inside that little bottle, that container, and I put it into a small cup. So that mixture is helping me to spread the paint around at these stages. So right now I grabbed some blue, probably some cerulean blue, and a little bit of yellow ochre and some white. So it's kind of a little greenish tint to the water. And you can see that I'm sort of grabbing all three colors and putting them together. And if I need to lighten it or darken it, I can change that. But at this stage, I'm not too concerned about really, particularly the color. For the value, I'm trying to get a good idea, but I can still move darker or lighter at this stage and not be too concerned about over painting or kind of losing my way. The value structures still can change a little bit, although the basics are in there, particularly that dark area that I first put in. Again, if you squint down at this point, really squint your eyes at the photo and then the painting, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And that concept of squinting is really just negating the details. So this part you can see I'm painting now is the distance, which is fall foliage. It was sort of like, I think, late November, actually early November maybe. And I put down some ultramarine, some white, a little bit of yellow ochre or raw sienna, and now I also put in a bit of my warmest red, which I believe is a permanent red that I'm using. It's a brighter red, and just sort of making a lavender look to the background. The photo's not showing it too much, but there's a little bit more atmosphere um, in that day than the photo might be displaying. So I really wanted to get that color in first, and then I can highlight the trees later. Again, starting with my darker values first. Um, that's generally what I do. You probably hear that theme quite often throughout my paintings, but it is, it's a basic process that uh, I think might have something to do with some cohesion in my work in general that makes it look um, have a certain level of similarity from painting to painting. It's pretty subtle, but it's one of the things. So I start dark first, and then I can build my lights on top of that. Watercolors will sometimes work in the opposite direction. So now I'm doing some sky, and that's um, sort of the same mixture that the water had, but I've actually lightened it up a little bit with some, um, probably put some lemon yellow in there, or maybe a little bit of Indian yellow, mixtures of warm and cool yellows, and some titanium white to lighten it. So the sky you can see now is reading a little bit brighter, a little bit lighter in value than water, and I want that to be again a starting point for the value relationships. You see, I mean, I move around a bit on all my canvases. I can really jump around to different things. That's how I work. Some people really like to work on a certain area, get it done with. That's okay too. I'm not too familiar with working in that manner. I find that I get a little bit of color harmony when I'm able to paint a spot like I am right now, like that cabin um, for the skiff and the hull. So I have that really nice, probably ultramarine and titanium white mixture, and the little chatter that sits um, on top of the cabin. And then I can use that blue and I bounce it around a little bit to some other places, a little bit lower in the hull, right there, and reflect it into the water a little bit. Sometimes I almost think of it as I'll, if I do a certain area with a that commands a certain color, I will then sometimes just go ahead and just sort of wipe my brush off on the canvas by spreading that color around a little bit into some places, and it rings through with harmony, meaning that the colors aren't just isolated uh, in certain spots. It helps with temperature too. When we talk about the temperature of the color, sometimes if I'm doing that blue shadowed part of a boat, I can take it and say to myself, well, you know what, I could use that color over behind a rock, or maybe um, behind one of these pilings that are along the seawall. You saw just a minute ago, I was actually wiping my brush off clean, just sort of pulling the paint off that was left on it. And I'm just putting in some splotches of paint for the chatter inside of the boat window. Grabbing some red. Gonna knock in a little bit of where um, that mooring ball or that float is hanging off the boat there. I'm very lucky when painting boats that they always tend to have some sort of bright um, bit of candy on them, be it the buoys or the mooring ball. Sometimes there's a fall weather gear that's hanging, like the waders. that type of stuff. It's all adds so much interest to the boat. Sometimes I think if that stuff wasn't there, there'd be a little bit of drabness um, when painting the harbors, but definitely adds to the excitement when you have those bright bursts of color. So I indicated it there. You can see that orange red bit, and I'm sort of putting the reflections in right now for it too. This is a really nice day. I think the weather was pretty warm and maybe unseasonably warm. It probably should have been a little bit cooler at this time of year, but we caught some really nice days in November in our area, much warmer than normal. Just recently at this spot, there was some photographs going around on social media about the king tide that had just happened just now in the late. It was just I think late last few days of December, or maybe just the turn of the year. Um, the king tide was like the water was above that, almost I think above that seawall, very close to it. It came into the parking lot a little bit from what I had heard, and actually I had seen in the photographs. So there I'm dropping in the indication of the top of the seawall. Um, you can't see the stones and the concrete that make it up on the other side or going down towards the water, where the tide line goes up and down. Um, but it's a nice lead in to the painting for sure. But I don't want to make it too symmetrical or too straight in its appearance. Breaking that long line up a little bit is advisable. Um, and sometimes that's where the creativity has to come into play to make it more interesting. Um, I find that continuous lines in a painting, to me, can sometimes be um, either disrupting or, frankly, sometimes cause a bit of, of dullness in the painting or too much of one thing happening. It's usually with tree lines and horizon lines, you find that kind of thing going on. In this painting, I'm trying to pay attention to it in that seawall, not too. It does curve a little bit. You can see it in the photograph. So it's something I want to try to be a little bit mindful of. Maybe make it into blocks. There are some separations and cracks in it, so utilizing all those types of little elements uh, can really help you to delineate a little bit more than maybe what's in real life. So right now I'm doing some back to some blues and some cerulean and titanium white, and I'm knocking in some of that blue in the water. A little bit brighter out that distance, for sure. Again, if you look at the photograph, it's not giving you the proper colors, but and I mean by the photograph, the video behind the canvas, but it is brighter. Um, and you can read that in the video. I have that big tree on the left there. I'm not going to be painting that into the scene. So I sort of have that tree line in the background sitting way up high on my canvas. There I'm starting to form the posts, the piers a little bit, pylons. Those are very nice because they all have different lengths and different heights, which is pretty cool. Um, and speaks to sort of the age of it. Nowadays, when they build a pier or a dock, it is engineered to perfection, and um, those pylons are usually, you could draw a plumb line right, or take a plumb line right across the top of them, and they'll be level. Um, so when I find that, I'll revert back to something like this, where there's a little bit more character to them. Raise them up and down a little bit. Again, that varying um, element. Yep, knocking in some more of the water right there. Again, just I'm moving around a bit. You can see the puddles of paint on my canvas, which means that they don't dry up too quick, so I can keep going back to them and move around to them. And I find that develops the painting, for me anyway, in a very pleasing way. Yep, I'm trying to highlight the side of the pylons, which they have a little bit of a more of a um, greenish tint to them. They sometimes have that. Either they have algae on them or whatnot, but it's not showing up too much in the video image. But um, regardless of that, the important thing to note is the light hitting them on the right side. So I picked this subject. It was this is one of those days where I know the spot very well, and I know even kind of know the boats now that are there throughout the season, and as things change. And this is a day that's a little tricky finding the right place. Sometimes the boats are out, and I hadn't done these before. These are shellfish skiffs, I believe, probably for uh, what we call quahogs around here, little necks, things like that. So at this point, I'm going back into lightening up those trees in the background, so you can see the reds, oranges. I'm pulling in now a little bit more to indicate the light that is coming from the right that will be hitting them way off in the distance. I was glad I found the spot when it was it was a little tricky picking the right place, but that happens when plein air painting. Sometimes you know exactly where you're going to go, exactly what you want to do. Sometimes you just head out and plans change. There's a boat not there that you saw the week before, and something like that. Those things happen to me all the time. Where the best laid plans, I guess, is what they say. So you have to be able to adapt and move on to something else. It's really about learning and studying what's in front of you. It could be a dumpster, or an ugly alleyway. Those they can be the most beautiful paintings sometimes. So um, I like to find the happy medium between um, some classical looking New England scenes that also may be a little bit off the beaten path, or maybe a different corner. This is definitely a sort of a you know little hidden notch in the harbor that maybe not everybody gets to, or has an angle of when they visit the area. So um, that's why I picked this spot. It's a little bit different for me anyway. You see, I've got the titanium white going now. I'm always tweaking that with some other colors like Indian yellow, lemon yellow, yellow ochre, and that's where I can really just put in little splotches of paint that have some intention of form in modeling of the elements and objects is trying to portray, but it's also still paint. It's still a brush stroke. So I try to walk that um, really kind of a thin line between the depiction and putting down a sculptural brushstroke. Right there, I have a little bit of a cooler um, white. It's not quite as tinted by the by the yellows, and those are just indications of all those boats that are in the distance. They're really just brushstrokes that are um, helped along by the flat brush. The flat brush is amazing how um, it just makes the shapes for you. Um, I find that anyway, as opposed to round brushes. The flat, like right there, that just makes such a nice stroke. That's just the surface of the water. I'm trying to brighten it up a little bit. But when it comes to doing the edges of buildings or boats, the flat brushes are really helpful to me. If you take a second to squint down again, you can start to see some resolution to the painting. It's still a ways off here, but now I'm bouncing back again to the trees in the distance, brightening them up. So you can see how I've gone from that darkness and I've just kept building um, the lights on top, even in the middle of it, hitting the midtones in the middle of the process, knowing that I might get brighter, leaving that option open. Yeah, I'm putting a little bit of warmer color into that green, um, the grass area. For that, I let the again the edges of that flat brush do some of the work for me. I use just about every angle of the flat brush you can think of. I'm always twisting and turning the brush throughout the painting process. It's very seldom that it hits the canvas at the same angle all the time. It's always different. So as much as the brush is being pushed by my hand and my wrist, it's also being twisted all the time. There I'm trying to indicate a little bit of the shadows of the casting from the piers and the posts. This was really fun at this part. And I'm kind of just knocking in little indications of those reeds. You can see them blowing in the wind now. My palette's getting pretty messy there. I could probably clean it up, but it's good to have a lot of space to mix because you want to have a spot to go on your palette to do what you want to do rather than have to take time to clean up. And so there's a little bit of a brighter blue on the brush there. So as I go deeper into the painting, I'm also moving away from the more monochromatic uh, tones, and I start to get a little bit more brighter, purer color, and that's tying into with the value of getting brighter, but also addressing the colors that are going to be enhanced with that brightness. The process of color usage is, an art form in itself, and I suggest anybody to, if you can take a class in color theory or get some books on it, it's an incredible amount of help. I try to touch on it um, in sort of a rudimentary way, and every time I demonstrate or talk about painting, um, but it's really something all in itself. And some painters paint strictly for the purpose of expressing color and all these things about form and how do you make the hull of a boat correct and all that. That's not really a concern of theirs, and that's fine. Um, I guess I try to meld a little bit of everything together um, into the artwork to bring all a little bit of all those elements into play: color, form, value. The boats in the background, just took a little little interplay back and forth between some light, some dark, some little mass that would just touched in with the edge of the brush, and then you have the impression, and that's of course where impressionism comes from, is the impression of a whole bunch of boats at dock, way off in the distance, that your eyes don't really focus on, unless you really want to. But in the painting, they won't be. There are some boats in the middle ground that I'm probably leaving out of this painting, um, which is okay. Again, as the paintings develop, I don't always know what exactly is going to come about at the end. I don't have a snapshot in my mind. Some artists say they do, or you should, or I don't necessarily think that way. It always evolves and kind of starts directing me where to go. So yeah, I'm just scraping in my signature. I was gonna, not that I'm done, because I'm gonna show you a little bit more here. But for that session outside, had done taken it about as far as I could. I wanted it to dry up a little bit. So there it is on the outside on the easel. And here it is. On the right was a little version I worked up in the at home. I went back into it maybe a few days, maybe even a couple weeks later, and I really wanted to boost up some of it. You can see the light on the well, really the light everywhere is a little bit more enhanced, and I had to kind of wait for it to dry up a little bit. So right from the water in the lower right to the top of the seawall, um, and particularly you can see up in the upper part of the water, um, that goes off into the distance, how I brightened that up. I wasn't getting that out in the field, so I did that and just really brightened up a lot of things. The pylon, um, the lit sides of the pylons and piers are enhanced. So just sort of really brought the painting together with some of those final that final value stretch of lightness. Here you can see I have my palette colors that I have up there. Just wanted to run through it really quick. Starting in the upper right, titanium white. Then there is a warm gray and a cold gray. You can choose different variations from manufacturers. A lemon yellow or a cool yellow. Then I have an Indian yellow, which again can be, it's pretty transparent, but just as long as it's a warm yellow. I have several warm yellows here. I have a cadmium orange and then a yellow ochre. The cadmium can also be replaced with something else too. Raw sienna, love it. One of my favorite colors. A bright red, could be vermilion, something like that. Burnt sienna, Prussian blue, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and sometimes I put a green in there. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again real soon, and hope you get to paint Wickford sometime.